This talk is basically about the Inca, but it's not covering the history of the Inca per se from a conventional viewpoint. It's just that everything in Cuzco and the Sacred Valley of Peru is prescribed by archaeologists as being Inca. And the local people who live there also believe, in general, that the Inca built everything in Cuzco and the Sacred Valley. But from my first wanderings around the city, I noticed completely different forms of technical expertise, from reasonably rough to almost surgical precision. And anytime I would ask the tour guides, how do you explain that? They would simply say, we have to go here now, because they literally didn't know and didn't want to answer the questions. So basically, this is a comical representation of how some people regard the Inca, not as being simple human beings, but as being these superhumans in antiquity. What we do know is that the Inca left the area around Lake Titicaca, which is south of Cuzco, about the year 950. And so through the archaeology and oral traditions, the question is, where did they come from? Basically, we know they came from the area around Lake Titicaca, but where precisely is open to conjecture. One place is the Island of the Sun, which is on the Bolivian side, and this is Inca architecture. We know that because pottery has been found, which is of solely Inca, and by seeing the designs on the pottery, we know that this was built by the Inca probably just before they left Titicaca or when they expanded their territory and moved back into that area. And this again is another example. What you can see is you see basically field stone that's been stacked. Often what they also did is they didn't have concrete, but they had clay that they could use, which is what the basic area is made up of throughout Peru, and so they would use that as mortar. This is on the Island of the Moon, which is next to the Island of the Sun, and this again is true Inca architecture. You can see field stone with mortar made up of this very fine clay-like mud, and then what they would also do in buildings that they wanted to adorn, they would apply almost like a stucco, and the trapezoid figure and the step style are two aspects which archaeologists identify positively as being Inca in style. Another possible candidate is Tiwanaku, which is on the southern shore of Lake Titicaca. The problem is everything in this picture you can see, aside from the megaliths, the standing stones, was reconstructed in the 1960s out of what was lying in the area. So this was an attempt to replicate what it looked like without actually knowing what it looked like. But you can see this is megalithic in nature. And the most famous artifact in the Pumapunku Tiwanaku area is this. It's called the Sun Gate. One thing you'll notice about the Sun Gate is the major split, diagonal there. And that's how it was found in the 19th century. It was found broken in half and half sunk into the mud. And this is the neighboring site. It's actually part of the same site, but it's given a different name, and this is Pumapunku. And it's here where we find incredible precision, as if machine tools were used, possibly, according to Arthur Poznansky, up to 15,000 years ago. So the original building of the Tiwanaku Pumapunku area had nothing to do with the Inca, because the Inca, we know, go back about to 900 AD and possibly, or obviously before that, but not as far back as 15,000 years ago. This is the type of precision that we find at Pumapunku. That channel that was carved there and those holes were clearly done with machines. I've taken engineers there and they are completely bewildered. The common thought by archaeologists and anthropologists is that the Inca only had, up until the time that the Spanish conquered them in 1533 that they had copper chisels, bronze chisels, and stone hammers. You cannot achieve that level of accuracy with those tools. And that's why the Tiwanaku Pumapunku area are so obscure. This is an example of how some German engineers replicated what they thought some of the stones at Pumapunku looked like originally before the site underwent massive destruction, mainly due to later tribal people coming and recycling the materials. And these are the people who have been found at Tiwanaku. This, of course, goes back to my talk about these enigmatic people with elongated skulls, but these skulls have been found in abundance in the Tiwanaku Pumapunku area. However, they're no longer on display, not even one of them in the museum there. Now, the oral tradition states that Manco Capac and his wife, who was also his queen, and his sister, traveled triumphantly from Lake Titicaca and founded the city of Cuzco. However, the reality behind it is the fact that they were forced out about the year 950 because the area of Tiwanaku, and that would include the island of the sun and moon, underwent 50 years of massive drought. It was the result of an El Nino effect that went completely crazy. And so a tribal people, the Aymara, saw the weakness and attacked these people who would become the Inca and forced them to flee. Now, they traveled north. None of the oral traditions nor the Spanish chronicles state why they traveled north rather than south or east or west. I think they were following a road that already existed. And this is how the Inca are depicted. All of these drawings or paintings were made after the fall of the Inca Empire, civilization. More than 90% of the Inca royalty died as the result of a civil war prior to the Spanish arrival. And that's why it was so easy for the Spanish to conquer. The Spanish were not very, super intelligent people or noble or great warriors. The whole Inca civilization was in complete disarray and decay, and the Spanish took advantage. So this is what the Spanish king, he asked his painters, probably in the 16th century or maybe even 17th century, to paint the Inca, but there were no royal people left, so the artist probably just saw people on the street and made a montage. But it's doubtful that the Inca actually looked like this. The men did not have long hair. This is more realistic. You see this person, this is a drawing, a very early Spanish drawing, and you see that this Inca has very short hair. Now, where they were bound was what's called the Sacred Valley of Peru, and that's outside of Cuzco. The reason it's called sacred is because it's incredibly productive in terms of agriculture, and probably has been for thousands of years. So for a people fleeing from a place where food could barely be grown, this would obviously become named the Sacred Valley. The question is, did they know it was there, or were they simply following this road that led in that direction? This is the type of, this is the Wadi culture that preceded the Inca, who the Inca conquered. And again, you see dry stacked stones, sometimes with a clay mortar mixed in. It's not sophisticated in terms of construction. But this is what the Inca would have encountered. About an hour's drive south of Cuzco on this ancient road, which is now the major thoroughfare, this is an example of Inca-style construction. Again, it's basic stone mixed in with clay mortar. But this is megalithic construction. Multi-ton blocks fitting together without mortar whatsoever, and in most places you can't fit a human hair in between these joints. This man is Dr. Arlen Andrews. He's an engineer from the United States, and I took him there, and after he spent at least 2 hours there, I asked him and I said, could people with bronze chisels and stone hammers make this? And he said, no, that's impossible. He couldn't explain how this was made or who made it. I believe that this megalithic construction was there when the Inca arrived. And when they got into Cuzco, right in the center, they built a building called the Coricancha, and that became and was always the center of their spiritual activity from the beginning of their city of Cuzco up until the conquest of the Spanish. Now, what you'll notice is that, supposedly this was the Incas' first building, but the question is, how could they have achieved this with the tools that are found in the archaeological record? The stone itself, and this is the Inca, so-called Inca part, the stone itself is basalt, and the quarry is 50 kilometers away. This is the Church of Santo Domingo, which the Spanish built right on top of the Coricancha, because the first quest of theirs, and the first quest of any conquering people, is to destroy the belief system of a people. Because if you destroy the belief system, you destroy their identity. This is a model of what the Coricancha is believed to have looked at the time of the Spanish conquest. And this is what we find inside. We find these strange blocks that you also find at places like Tiwanaku that pair up in different ways. Sometimes they're these eye shapes, sometimes they're different shapes like that. And due to the shape of that, what would have happened is they would have poured molten bronze into this area in order, supposedly, to make the stones hold together tight. The trouble is, Cuzco is at about 9,000 feet altitude, so the air is very thin. It's hard to boil water at that altitude. So how did they have the technology to be able to have a portable smelter to move along inside this building and pour these clasps? But what's more profound are other things you find in the Coricancha. This strange doorway with all of the channels and holes cut into it, conventional archaeology says that was done so that textiles could be hung from this door, which is not actually a door. The trouble is, this stone is called andesite. It's harder than granite, and the Inca didn't have the tools to be able to carry out this, complex operation. But this is more profound. This is this is inside that building as well. It's just a stone that's been basically placed in a pile with others. And that is a precision engineered hole about 1.5 inches in diameter that is perfectly straight and 2.5 feet long. The only reason it's 2.5 feet long is the other end is broken. So we have no idea how long it was originally. Again, I've shown this to 2 engineers, and they both are completely dumbfounded as to how it could have been done. And in the interior of the Coricancha, again, you have completely mortarless construction. And many of the joints here, like I said, people say you can't fit a credit card. You can't fit a human hair in between these joins. This is a very strange object in the center of the Coricancha. So since the Coricancha was the center of the spiritual operations and belief system, this is the center of the Coricancha. And this is a basalt block that has been hewn out of solid basalt. No one that I've talked to in 20 visits to Cuzco can explain what it is, how it was made, or when it was made. And on a spiritual level, this is what the Coricancha represents. These lines are called sekes, and they radiate out from the Coricancha. They're not necessarily always straight like that, but dotted along them, each one of them are sacred sites, radiating out from the center. And this street is just outside the Coricancha. And on an equinox solstice, or at least on the solstices, the sun rises perfectly up above this hill. So this is a true Inca road. But what's more intriguing is what we're going to look at right here. And what you have here is you have 3 very distinct styles of construction in one corner. This is megalithic. And as you can see, this is the base. So that would make it older. This, unfortunately, has been damaged. But again, the joinery here is so precise that you can't fit a human hair in between. And this stone comes from 30 kilometers away. This is gray basalt, and it's not as large in terms of construction, but still the joinery is very tight. And on this side, you have what is conventional, the conventional Inca style. So I and others have started to develop a belief that prior to the Inca, there was another civilization of very major builders. But prior to them were these master builders who were able to achieve almost perfect joinery. And this is not the only example in Cuzco. There are multiple examples where you have this schizophrenic-looking construction. But the reason why it looks that way is because you have an ancient civilization. The city of Cuzco is abandoned for whatever reason. Another sophisticated civilization comes in and rebuilds the structure, but they can't match the first builders. And then you have the Incas who see the beauty and mastery of the old builders, and they rebuild the building based on how, the technology they know. Now, in the basement of the Coricancha are these elongated skulls that are labeled as being Inca, but they've never been carbon-14 tested nor DNA tested. And again, when you ask the staff, who were these people? They say, well, those were the Inca. And when you say, can you clarify? It's like, not really. We found these during the excavations. So they have no explanation as to who these elongated skull people were found in this most sacred site in Cuzco. This is just another example. This is the outside of the Coricancha. And what you see again is you see three distinct styles. This is, I think, the most ancient style. Again, over about 300 feet, you can't fit a human hair in between these joins. Then you have this, which I believe is Inca construction because we do have mortar in between, which is the clay-based mortar. As soon as the Spanish arrived, they brought with them the technology of concrete, which they had probably learned long back from the Romans who had occupied the area. And so the Inca probably found these stones and tried to piece something together, quite well. But then, once they ran out of this material, then they continued with their style. And above that is actually the Spanish construction. It's so poor that they tended to use a lot of stucco to, in some cases, possibly to hide their poor workmanship. Because they used mortar, but often it would be 1 inch or 2 inches thick. And that's why when there would be an earthquake in Cuzco, the Spanish buildings just collapse. But the ancient pre-Inca structures don't move whatsoever. And this is another wall. It's a different form of construction, but it's even in some ways more intriguing. Because what they'll tell you when you go there is they'll say, this is the head of a puma. And you go, well, maybe, kind of looks like it could be. But when you're shown, when you move back and you see a bigger picture of it, you see this, that whoever these builders were, not only did they want to do something complicated with every stone being a different shape, they decided to make a jigsaw puzzle of a puma design here, the tail, the head, and the legs. And next to this is what they call the serpent. And again, you see this, and you could say, well, that looks sort of like an eye, I guess. But when you move back, then you see the full serpent design. So whoever the master builders were, they decided to make things even more complicated by putting pictographs into their walls. This is related to what we'll talk about later, but this is a wall on Rapa Nui, Easter Island. It's unique in its construction, but it's very reminiscent of the ancient builders of the area of Peru. And this I show just as another example of where the Inca probably recycled an old building that may have fallen down as a result of an earthquake. Because what you can see here is you can see this precision cut here that no longer serves a purpose. But what the Inca did is they reconstituted the wall and they put shims in and mortar and things like that to make it look presentable and stable. This is probably one of the finest examples of Inca style, because with all the marks that you can see on the surface of the stone, you can see where stone hammers would have been in use. And this is a trick that the Inca used in order to make their buildings look like the ancestral buildings. On the outside and on the inside, the joinery looks perfect. But what they did is in the center, they filled it with rubble. When the building would have been completed, you wouldn't have seen the core. So walking from the outside to the inside, you would think that the whole thing was seamless. And that's another example of how they, I won't say cheated, but how they tried to make it look the same. You see how it's tight in the front and very loose in the back. This, on the other hand, is the interior of the Coricancha building, which I showed you. And this is the joinery. It is seamless, and it goes 3 feet in this direction, from front to back. Now, what's important about this is that this wall is broken. And so if you follow from the front to the back, you can't find a gap anywhere between the front and the back. And that is a technical marvel by any culture of any time, including present-day us. This is Saqsaywaman, which is on a hill above Cuzco. And again, it's prescribed as being Inca, but you see the size of the stones used. The one that I'm in front of is 17 feet tall, but the foundation of it is this stone itself, and it goes 12 feet down farther into the ground, making an incredibly stable foundation. So this stone is 29 feet tall and weighs 120 tons. And how the Inca could have moved that, it's not simply the case like in Egypt where everything's, is quite flat. You see, this is the landscape of Cuzco. It's all mountains. The quarry for this is it's only 3 kilometers away, but trying to move a 120-ton stone when you don't have trees big enough to act as rollers is technically impossible. And this is just another artifact that is in Cuzco. These are called the Inca Thrones, but the average tour guide in Cuzco will say everything that's cut like that is an Inca throne. The problem with that is that there are at least 5,000 of these in the Cuzco area. So that's a lot of Incas sitting down. And what this is facing is actually this mountain, which is called Ausengate. So of course, anytime you see a structure, you want to see what is it, what is this structure looking at? The conventional tour guides will tell you that it's looking at the Incas sitting here looking at the parade ground. The trouble is the parade ground is off to the right. The only thing straightforward is this ancient Apu, which is a sacred mountain. And then this is basically next to the previous picture. And again, this is an example. You can see the incredible erosion, as if rain has been pelting on this for thousands of years. And again, this is one example. This is a tiny example of one of more than 5,000 artifacts in Cuzco and the Sacred Valley. This structure is again at Saqsaywaman, and it's called the Chincana. And if you look at it, you'll see all of these staircases that go up and all these areas cut out. This is one single stone, and there's a human being on top of it. So again, the Inca didn't have the technology to be able to extract stone, and even engineers now look at that and are bewildered as to why they wouldn't simply cut the stone in sheets and remove it, why they pull these cubes out. This is the other side of this structure. And this is what it faces. The thing is that, again, the guides and archaeologists say, well, this was an Inca throne, or these were thrones. But this is what it faces, and the distance is only about 20 feet from these thrones to that wall. It doesn't make any sense. The walls, or these terraces, were probably built by the Inca much later than the Chincana structure. And this is a massive piece that broke off of the Chincana, and there is a stairway, if you can see here, this very narrow stairway. Part of it's here, part of it's not in the frame. But underneath here, when I was there last time, I was able to find the access point. And underneath here, there are 160 stone steps that go down. And then there's a tunnel that goes for 2 miles, and it ends up underneath the Coricancha in Cuzco. It's solid bedrock. This is another amazing structure in the vicinity. It's called the Temple of the Moon. And it has, aside from all of these interesting cutout things, it also has 2 caves. This is the entrance to one of them. You notice the seeming polished surface here, as if some of us think that was heat application of some kind. And that's going farther inside of it. And when I turn around, I look at this, which is a flat structure surface that 3 to 4 people could easily lie on. And it's just an astonishing technical achievement. Nearby as well is this, which is called Kenko. And this is a labyrinth inside of a solid chunk of stone the size of an apartment building. This is after you leave through the labyrinth, you come out, and you can see these are surfaces which have been cut by somebody at some point in time. But again, the archaeologists all say, well, the Inca did that. And this is the interior. And this structure is one that few people have seen, and we've kept it kind of private because it's a very sacred little sanctuary. Unfortunately, the local mayor, who lives in a town outside Cuzco, is advertising this. And so on the next Megalithomania tour in November, this is one place we're going to visit. It's inside of a cave, in a side valley. Anytime I've been there, there's never been anybody. And this is what this last thing is facing, is this hewn out doorway, or double doorway. Some people have said it looks very similar to structures in Egypt. But it's like, what would be the function of that? And who would have put hundreds or thousands of man-hours into this kind of thing? It's one of thousands of bewildering things that draw me back to Cuzco, and probably will for the rest of my life, because there is no conventional explanation as to how it was done and what it is. That's just a detail of the workmanship. And this structure is very similar to the one in the cave, and as far as I know, it's the only other one of its kind. You can see obviously that it's a fountain, but more careful examination shows that this is the bedrock, and this very beautiful pattern has been carved out very precisely. Next to it, you have these stones pushed into place, not as finely done as that. And in behind, you have the Inca. So the story we're developing is the fact that this was here first from the first culture. The second culture came and was in awe of this, and so they wouldn't dare touch it, but they would add to it. And the Inca were in awe of both of these, named these places as sacred sites, and then added theirs into it. This structure, if you look at half of it, like this top half, you'll see that that's what that fountain was. And this is called the Chincana, or it's also called the Inca Cross. The thing is that the Inca were a profound civilization, but their intelligence came from the fact that they learned not only from the other civilizations that they absorbed, not conquered necessarily, but absorbed, and everything that came before them. This symbol is not Inca. This is at least 5,000 years old. And of the many things that it represents are energy, space, matter, and time, as well as the 4 seasons, and many, many other things that relate to the number 4. And here again, north, south, east, and west, water, land, air, fire. It goes on, you can keep going on forever with it. Another intriguing thing is that if you place the Chincana basically where Cuzco is, and you draw a 45-degree angle, you come to this line, which is, interestingly very similar to the so-called Michael and Mary lines, which I know nothing about, or just started learning today. But along this line are sacred sites. There's Tiwanaku, there's a place called Pucara, there is Cuzco, and there is Cajamarca, which is another ancient city. This also is called the Path of Viracocha. Viracocha was the creator, but these ancient people called the Viracochans were supposed to be these mystical teachers who came and left and followed along this line, eventually reaching the ocean and disappearing. Viracocha means foam of the sea. And also some believe that underneath this is a massive tunnel system that goes at least from here to there. But the Peruvian government will not allow you access. This is actually my favorite megalithic site called Ollantaytambo, which we will see in November, and it's on the way to Machu Picchu. Most people spend an hour or two here waiting for the train because they're just totally focused on, and to some degree brainwashed about, the fact that Machu Picchu is supposed to be the ultimate example of Inca architecture. But this site of Ollantaytambo occupies 600 hectares, and it shows us distinctly at least 3 different styles of construction, going from profoundly precise to Inca, which I'm not saying the Inca weren't great builders, but the Inca were social organizers. So everything they built fast because they had to accommodate an ever-growing population. By the time the Spanish arrived, the population under their care, not under their control, because the Inca were not cruel rulers, they were caretakers. They took care of 15 million people. Cuzco at that time was 250,000 people. And this is just another view of the amazing Ollantaytambo. Now this I put in because I find it quite comical. This is the men's room, and what 99.999% of the people who go to use the men's room don't realize is that they're looking at a megalithic construction right outside. Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay. But you can see that this is probably a single piece of stone that was removed from there. And again, one of thousands of examples. And this is going up to what's called the Temple of the Sun. Now here clearly you can see this is polygonal construction, which is like what we saw at Saqsaywaman. This is Inca period, and above that are these granite blocks, some of them 40 tons in weight. And this is a throne. Aside from all the 5,000 others that are said to be, or even more than 5,000, said to be Inca thrones, this one's intriguing because it's so well shaped. It even has an armrest in between. And this again is andesite. It's harder than granite. The surfaces are polished. And the back is ergonomic. It's curved so that you could sit there and feel very comfortable. The question is, what is this looking at? And this is what it's looking at. This is a human profile, 500 feet tall. Most people say it's natural, but if you look carefully, you'll see there's an eye here, and there's a mouth here, and the photograph isn't that great, but you'll see there's a fang or one tooth here. The nose seems to have fallen off, and below that he has a beard and seems to be wearing a helmet. And he's called Tunupa because he represents one of the ancient teachers that came, taught, and then left. At the Sun Temple, again, this is where we find these 40-ton blocks of granite that came from a quarry across the other side of the valley and up the mountain. The little trail that leads down from there could not accommodate these because it's very narrow, and anytime somebody, even if they were dragging it, tried to move one of these blocks onto this trail, it would fall down and go into the river. Now, what's interesting is that I believe, and others do, that this is how the Inca found it. They found this temple, and it had collapsed probably because of a cataclysm. And what they did is, in a loving way, they put stones underneath out of respect. This just shows another example of the size of them. This was us filming Ancient Aliens about a year ago. And here again we find examples of these where the molten metal would have been poured theoretically to hold the stones together. And this is all that's left of the actual Temple of the Sun. This wall is still intact. And the reason why it is because of these shims that you can see here. Those are believed by archaeologists, and I think, and others think quite rightly as well, that they're like earthquake-proofing shims, because this wall had to stay where it was because it was strategic in terms of the rising and setting of the sun, or at least rising of the sun during the solstices. So during a massive earthquake, these shims could move up and down and not allow the wall to move out of position. Also, it was built against the side of a hill, so even if there was a major catastrophe, that wall, luckily it stayed, whereas the rest of it is literally exploded off into every possible direction. And this is how we think the Inca reconstituted the wall. They couldn't put the stones back together because some were down at the bottom of the hill. So what they did is they lovingly built another wall, and they built in between, like this. And this is simply looking down from there, and this shows the brilliance of the Inca. This is their terracing system. That's a human being. These terraces average 10 feet tall, and in some places in the Sacred Valley, they go from the valley floor to the tops of mountains, 2,000 feet vertical, one terrace after another for 2,000 plus feet to the very top. That is engineering brilliance. And this is very weird, but it's real. It's an optical illusion. From the Sun Temple, which is here, you look down, and if you look, there's a road this way, and there's another one going off that way. From the top of a mountain way up over here is a little Inca temple, and when you look down from there, what you have is the appearance of a pyramid missing its capstone. It's difficult to see, but if you look as if this is a corner, and over here is another corner. It's so big that you can't take it in with a camera, but this is the angle, the diagonal angle here, and this is where the capstone's missing. It's just one of many anomalies in the Sacred Valley of Peru. And here again, at Ollantaytambo, we find another strange thing where engineering of some kind was employed. And this is me with Ancient Aliens. I'm showing them the conventional story. And that's that during the solstice, the sun, because Cuzco is quite close to the equator, the sun comes down through one of these knobs and fits into that channel. But why would somebody put so much time and effort into shaping the solid wall like that when they could simply have built it out of a number of stones? Ollantaytambo again, and moving farther back to other strange things. Again, this area that's cut out and polished. And above that is this. This is called the Temple of the Condor. This is probably natural, but this is the head of the condor, neck, and its wing sweeps back. And the whole thing has these areas, vertical and horizontal, where these cubes have been removed. Most tourists never go to this area, but it's one of the most intriguing. And this is at the base. Again, masterful construction. And again, and again. This is where we see that one culture shaped this area here flat, and then I believe the next culture came and lovingly put this wall in. Pieces are missing because these are small enough that the Spanish could have easily harvested this for their own buildings. Looking across from that site is this mountain. And as I zoom in, you see there are possibly three things here. This is the masterwork of the Inca, which is a granary. I know that because I climbed up to it. And it's Inca construction. It's adobe mixed with stone. Over here is what's called the Temple of Okocha. I've never been able to make it because it's more than 1,000 feet up, and you have to cross this area which is loose gravel. So one step and I would be here very quickly. But what's intriguing is this shape. You see there's a little temple-like structure on top, and actually another one here. And when I zoom in and get closer, this is the Tinupa character. So some say it's natural, and I very much question that. I think it's partially shaped by someone in the distant past. Going from one head to another, we finally reach Machu Picchu. And I never denigrate Machu Picchu. It's gorgeous. The trouble is that it's so popular and is so prostituted by the government of Peru that at least 2,000 tourists a day go there. It only housed about 1,000 people at its prime. So it's being beaten to death because it's being loved to death, unfortunately. And this is a little weird, but maybe the mountains in the background, or a collection of them, form the shape of this face. Most people laugh at the idea, but Peru is a place of amazing enigmas. And this is what Photoshop says, it may look like. Now, Machu Picchu, again, I think was built over 3 periods. 90% was built by the Inca, including this incredible terracing system that goes up. Again, you see stone, sometimes shaped, sometimes not, stacked together, making amazing and efficient agricultural terraces. And then you have this. This is a solid block of stone that's been shaped. It has been erroneously been called the Sacrificial Stone because the Catholics, as soon as they showed up in Peru, as a way to control the population, they immediately made up stories that the Inca were into sacrifice. So they would describe this as being a sacrificial table where somebody's heart was taken out because the gods had to be appeased, but the Inca did not sacrifice people. That is a lie. This is probably a place of meditation, used by the Inca, but made by somebody far, far older. And when we bring Dr. Schock to this area, unfortunately he won't be able to see this, but my main reason for wanting to be with Dr. Robert Schock, who's coming in November, is that he's the man who dated the Sphinx. And so I would like to walk with him and show him structures like this and ask him, based on the where in terms of precipitation and sun, how old he thinks, or how long he thinks it has been between the construction and shaping of this, and based on erosion patterns, how old he thinks it is. This is what's called the Temple of the, it's the Temple of the Sun, the Temple of the Moon are the most overused words in Cuzco, but the Inca were very much into the sun. So this is the Temple of the Sun, and this is what's in the interior. Again, what you can make out from this is you have this beautiful precision here of almost uniform blocks. And even when you look down from the top, you see quite precise workmanship. For some reason, they're protecting something inside. The conventional story is that on the solstice, the sun comes through and strikes this line, and that's an indication that it's the solstice. But I'm sure there's far more to it than that. Nobody would go through all of that work when you could simply put a stick in the ground if you want to measure solstice. But this has been shaped it has angles all over the place, and I think its function is far more profound. It's just we have no clue who it was who made it. When you look at this, this is Inca period, and again, the front looks good, and if you go to the back, it looks good, but again, it's filled with rubble and things. This wasn't built at the same time as that. And that's just a close-up. Moving farther, we get to the Temple of the Three Windows, and this is an amazing accomplishment going back to our polygonal builders, because again, every single block is different and is of incredible precision. And what you can't see in the photo because it's blown up a little too much is you see you have rougher construction on top of it. Very little of Machu Picchu was rebuilt because it was found almost perfect by Hiram Bingham in 1911. And so most of the walls and buildings look exactly the way, aside from the removal of plants and trees and rubble, it looks the same as it did in 1911, but in a slightly cleaner state. This is a room just next to the Temple of the Three Windows, on the way up to what's called the Hitching Post of the Sun. And this has astonishing acoustic qualities. If you put your head into one of these niches, it echoes back at you very loud, and the whole room seems to vibrate. And that goes to the nature of the fact that, aside from probably earthquake activity where you have gaps, these buildings were so tightly fitting that they would resonate as one stone. And this is the famous Intihuatana, known as the Hitching Post of the Sun. Again, it's called a solstice marker, but that doesn't explain all of the different angles and flat areas, etc. on it. It's very complicated. Not only that, it's not simply one piece of stone, it's the top of a granite mountain. One of the simple things that it does is each corner points to a mountain, and theoretically, on top of each of those four mountains is one of these Intihuatanas. Just another view of the complexity of the shape. And this is a giveaway. This shows you megalithic next to very well done, and on top of that, inferior. The older is better than the newer. How could all of this have been done in such an odd fashion, theoretically, in the course of 30 or 40 years? We believe that Machu Picchu is far older, and that, again, three distinct cultures were there, the Inca being the last and having built the most. And the mountain that I showed you in the back that looked like a face, if you can remember that the nose was quite pronounced. On top of that are all of these structures. And from on top of that, looking down, you see this. Machu Picchu was actually built in the shape of a condor. This is the head of the condor, and stylized are the wings. This is the city itself. The condor faces west, which is symbolic, as of in Egypt, of the spirit goes to the west with the sun. Now, if you have a lot of energy and are mildly stupid, you decide to visit what's called the Temple of the Moon, and it's difficult. From the top of Huayna Picchu, which was the nose, you go down the backside and through a series of ladders and stairways that go on practically forever. You reach this little site, which is the Temple of the Moon. And it again is a mix of building styles. You have quite fine megalithic, and then rebuilding here, probably Inca building. But inside the cave, you find this, absolute masterpiece of work. It's the melding of someone's engineering and architectural mastery with a respect for what was there. So the roof is solid granite. This is the mountain. But they decided to meld their temple, or whatever it was, into the living stone itself in a respectful manner. And there are many other strange anomalies, like these two cupped out bowl things, which are actually the bedrock. This is called the Temple of the Condor. This is supposedly the condor's beak, and this is the white ruffle around his neck, but I think that's too simplistic. It's more profound. This is the exterior of the Sun Temple, built again on bedrock that's been hewn to make this building fit. This is the interior of it. And this is going farther into this room which is underneath the Temple of the Sun. And this is what Machu Picchu, this is how it was found. This is 1911, Hiram Bingham and several hundred Peruvian workers. The Peruvians did all the work. Hiram Bingham yelled at them probably. Typical colonial attitude. A number of people died during this because it was so overgrown with vegetation that there were poisonous snakes, and a number of Peruvians died as a result of this process. This is what Machu Picchu looked like. This is the Intihuatana area up here, and this is the Temple of the Three Windows area. But you can see megalithic here, like massive stones. And then you see above the megalithic, smaller and rougher construction. Again, that's like a time capsule. That's how it was found, and that to me is a clear indication that three distinct civilizations were there. Just another example, megalithic doorway with rougher construction above it. And probably the most important thing at Machu Picchu is the bookstore, because that's where you can buy my book. And then also I've written other books. This is the only one that's in print because of the cost. Printing costs are so prohibitive, and most publishing companies will only give the author about 5% of the retail. So if a book sells for $10, the author who's put in the majority of the work gets 50 cents. So my other books are as ebooks, and I've made them as guides so that on something like a tablet, you can take them to places like Machu Picchu, and then you can literally walk with the guide as you go. My Gringo Guide, which is self-defense against being ripped off in Peru. And this is this one I'm going to publish as an actual book next month. And this is my book about the Inca prior to the conquest, because the story of how they expanded their territory is very important. It's only by the time the Inca were done, and literally before the Spanish arrived, they had stopped expanding. They decided that their civilization was big enough. And so I wanted to tell the story of how the expansion was done, and there are only 4 cases in history, the history of the Inca, 4 cases where they were met with opposition. Most of the other cultures wished to join with them in league as a confederation, but most of the stories written about the Inca are these nonsensical stories of conquest. That's probably more like what European history was, and you can't take European history and bias like that, which many archaeologists have done, and apply it to other cultures. And this is my book about other sites around Peru. Thank you.